I wanted to introduce our topic. First, we're talking about supporting families well and how to collaborate with families for whom English is a second language. I will say the title of this webinar, Supporting Families Well, is a phrase I completely stole from Anita. Anita, I don't know if you remember, but when we met to brainstorm this session, that was a phrase you used when you talked about your work. And I thought that that is such a great phrase that really says what the goal of service coordination is, to really support families well, meet them where they are in the system and help them navigate it through, throughout their whole experience. So I loved that phrase that you used. I'll talk about a little bit more about our topic in just a second. I do want to invite you all to use your chat feature as your voice today. As we're going along, Anita and I are going to have a conversation about lots of questions, and I'll tell you more about the topics in just a moment. But I want to invite you all to use the chat to share in the conversation, to let us know your thoughts about the question, to share your tips and strategies, your experiences, and ask your questions there. Anita and I will be monitoring the chat as we go along today, so feel free to talk with us through the chat. If we miss a question, feel free to type it in if you need to more than once. I'll be keeping an eye on the question on the chat bubble too, or the chat pod, so we can always catch some questions up at the end if we need to. I also want to say a quick thank you to Seth Buffkin. Seth is our technology communications coordinator, and he designed our slides and has handled all the back end work with registration and everything. So just a big thank you to Seth. And yeah, Seth gets a big clap, a big thank you in the chat. So what I thought we would do today, first, Anita and I'll introduce ourselves, but I want you guys to type into the chat and let us know where you are, and let us know when you think about supporting families well, what does that mean to you? So let us know that in the chat. If you think about service coordination and supporting families well, what does that look like, or what does that mean to you? And you can think about it specific to supporting families for whom English is a second language, or if it's easier for you to think broadly, let us know what that phrase means when you think about your work. I'm just going to pause so we can see what pops up into the chat, and then we will dive in. Yeah, thanks, Corey. Supporting families how they wish to be supported, which is super important. And I think sometimes you need some extra tools in your toolbox to make sure you're doing that when the family speaks a language. Their primary language is a different language than yours. And that's some of the experience and the information Anita's going to share today. Hi, Sierra. She says, ensuring families have the tools and supports needed for their children. Yeah, so we have to find out what they need, and then you be creative in how we find those tools and share them. So thank you guys for getting us started there, and you guys can keep popping that into the chat. So I want to take the opportunity to introduce Anita. I already introduced myself. Oh, thanks, Maria. Maria has added in the chat, supporting families well means that families feel that they are heard and understood. And Maria, that's a theme I think you're going to hear from Anita as we go through today, how important that is. And I know, Anita, you're going to share a story a little later that kind of speaks to the importance of that collaboration. So when families work with an interpreter, for some of them, it may be the first time they've ever had that help to fully share their story with the professionals they're working with. And Camille says, making sure families' rights are being met. Yeah, and that families actually do know their rights too. So fantastic, you guys. Well, let me introduce Anita. So like I said, I'm delighted to have Anita with me. Anita is a service coordinator. She's been a service coordinator since 2013 with the Infant and Toddler Connection of Richmond. This topic's a real passion of Anita's, and it came out really clearly when we met to brainstorm this. So I think we've got the perfect person to be chatting about this topic today. So Anita, I'm really happy to have you here, and I want to welcome you. And I think you're going to be able to share a lot of your experience, a lot of your tips and strategies. So I hope you guys are ready to take in some great information. So let's go ahead and hear from you guys again. You've started out in the chat. Anita and I were curious about how long you guys have been a service coordinator. As I mentioned, Anita's been doing this work since 2013. Years ago, when I was in direct service, I was a service coordinator and developmental service provider for about 15 years. So we're going to use the stamp tool to find out how long you've been doing the work. So to access your stamp tool, you're going to hover your cursor at the top of your screen where you will see viewing options. You might see viewing Dana's screen. Look for the little downward caret and click that button. Oh, Joanne is on it. She's already got her star there. But you're going to click that button, look for the annotation. Look for the word annotations. When you click that, you'll open up a horizontal toolbar that's your annotation menu. Then you can look for stamps. You can drop an arrow. You could even draw on the screen and just let us know. Let us know on the continuum if you're new to the work, if maybe you've been doing this for a couple years or a lot of years, and maybe you're even all the way at the end, or you've been this long enough that it might be time to be thinking about retirement. If you have any trouble with the stamp tool, you can always use chat. Just drop your answer into the chat. So we'll be watching for that too. So it looks like there's lots of hearts and stars, a couple of little orange dots and purple. So folks are learning, you're getting the tool. So I'll pause to see as folks are dropping that in. So we have people all along the spectrum, Anita. We've got some folks that just started, kind of a cluster of folks in the 5-year, maybe the 10-year, between 5 and 10 years, and then a few folks who've been doing it long enough that is it time to retire already. Sierra says, I just came back to EI, but it's been between 5 and 10 years. Well, welcome back. We're glad to have you. So this is helpful, you guys. It's always nice to have a lot of experience range here. So even if you've been doing this for just a couple of months or just a few years, you may have some really great nuggets of information to share, or you might have questions, and this is a great place to ask them in the chat. For those of you that have been doing this a while, if you have worked with families who are English language learners, feel free to add your ideas and thoughts in the chat so we can all learn from each other. We want this to be a conversation today. I did want to find out in chat, for those of you that are in a blended role, if you're a service coordinator and play another role, like maybe you're a supervisor or you're also an occupational therapist, let us know in chat if you have another role. So you're in a blended role where you provide service coordination and another service. Type that into chat and let us know. Oh, thanks, Amy. Amy's been a service coordinator for 11 plus years. Great. Let us know if we have any folks that are in a blended role, service coordination and something else. I think, Anita, you are in what's called a dedicated role, correct? You're in service coordination, yeah, is your primary role. Okay. Well, I'll just keep, oh, let's see, Bailey says she's a physical therapist and service coordinator. Great. Virginia does it all kinds of different ways, right? Programs make this decision. Some folks are in that blended role and some are I think all of you are dedicated, but in the literature, the person is only in a service coordinator role is called a dedicated role. So we have service coordinator and social worker, service coordinator and developmental service provider. Yep, several people in a developmental service provider and service coordinator. So 10 years, Amy was 10 years as a PT and developmental service provider, now service coordinator only. So Amy, you've had a bunch of different roles. All right, thanks guys. We just wanted to get a sense of who was there. So be sure to X out of that horizontal toolbar, your annotation toolbar, click the little X in the upper right-hand corner. That will prevent you from continuing to accidentally drop stars and hearts and things on the screen as we move along. So Seth, if you don't mind clearing the screen for me, perfect. I'm gonna keep going. So today, as you know, we're going to talk about lots of strategies for working with families for whom English is a second language. Anita's going to share her expertise about how to partner with families and how to collaborate with interpreters, how to ensure communication within and across team members. Then we're going to get a little more specific into a kind of a parallel passion of Anita's, which is working with families of children who have more complex disabilities who are also English language learners. So we'll spend a little time there, and hopefully we'll have time today to chat a little about Anita's experience supporting families with the interpreter virtually, as many of you guys have done throughout the last couple of years. And we'll wrap up with thinking about transition. So we've got a lot to cover, so I'm going to go ahead and keep us moving. So I'm actually going to transition this over to Anita. Anita's going to get us started with a story, and I love this story because it helps kind of give us a grounding and some context for our discussions about service coordination today. So Anita, you are up.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I want to say that this is my passion. I am by no far a super expert, but it is something that I continue to want to be better at because I feel like we're working with families in one of the most vulnerable times. You can have a lot of money, you can have a little bit of money, but when you have that baby that's born at 23 weeks or has a trach, or we're walking alongside families, and so that common denominator is the child. And so I don't know it all, but I have a passion. And so I'm really looking forward to sharing and hearing and learning. So I want to tell you about this picture. This picture, this baby right here is my granddaughter. Her name is Victoria. She was born during the pandemic, and they live in Norfolk. Um, because of the pandemic and just because of everybody keeping their bubble small, at one point, I got to be there with my daughter while she was getting ready to go into labor. But then we tried to keep the bubble as small as possible. So I would be there only like when we had to do something, because she was still planning her wedding. So she was planning her wedding, and just like a lot of people during the pandemic, we also had a lot of loss and transition. So I would be there when we were going out for dress fitting, or I would be there when they were getting ready to leave to travel, and I needed to watch the cats. And so my granddaughter, she would look at me like, I don't know you, lady, but every time you come, my life is just all topsy turvy. I'm tired. I'm in a car. And so she was very uncomfortable. Whenever I would come, she would cry. And I didn't take it personal, but I had the opportunity to start to go down there at least once or twice a week, so she could just get to know me without being, going from here to there, just being there. And um, so jump to uh, the past spring break. My husband and I were down there, and we were being grandparent babysitters extraordinaire. My daughter was working from home, and we said, well, do you think she'd want to go outside with us? And she's like, oh, yeah, she'd love to go outside, but she never has been outside with anybody but her parents. And so we went outside, we were walking, and her mother was walking with us because she ended up having to go to check the mailbox. And we went across the street, and she stopped because she looked around and she said, okay, something is different here. My mommy's not here. And you could see her processing it. She was blinking. She was like, okay, what do I do? What do I do? Do I want to cry? I really want to be outside? We were looking at her and we were like, are you okay? She's like, I'm processing. Um, do you want to go back in? And she shook her head no. She had a little spoon, that same spoon that she goes out with. Um, and she kind of like talked to herself, and then she just started trotting down the street with her little spoon because she really wanted to be out there. But that was a process. It was a totally nonverbal process, but you could see that she was like, okay, this is new. What do I want to do? Okay, I think I know these people. And so this, even though it's 5 minutes or less of our time, was the second time I took her out. And I was by myself, and she just hit the door, because she knew, she had had that experience. Um, she wasn't nervous about it. She figured, I would take her back into the house. And so she just had the opportunity just to go around and just be a little girl and beat up everything with her spoon. And so when I wrote this, I posted this on we have an app that we share. It just says it's not a walk, it's more like an adventure. And so this is an adventure. And even though this is 4 minutes, this wouldn't have happened before then. And so I feel like that's what we do with our parents sometimes. We're walking alongside them, and it's just like, okay, this is new. I don't know you. What are we doing? What are we doing? And those nonverbal things can definitely be things that we have to allow people to process. You can't just like, takes time. And so that 4 minutes was worth it. So that's what I wanted to share.
Yeah, and
It's
I think
adventure.
taking that time, reading her body language, kind of being there, walking alongside her, I can definitely see the parallel, especially when you're trying to work with a family who communication is not as easy as it is necessarily with other families who speak the same language as you. And one of the things I loved about this, Anita, is not really a walk, more like an adventure. I mean, I think you could look at the work with families, it's a different adventure every time, and so you got to have the tools in your toolbox to make it as positive as possible, so they can, feel good about the situation. Because I like what you said with her, she's processing it like, I don't know what's happening. I mean, imagine families who are coming into this system is complicated, and then if you're struggling to communicate about your child, how much harder that could be without someone who is walking alongside you and trying to facilitate that communication in a positive way.
And in a pandemic, and I
Yeah.
mean, we're all feeling some kind of way, and it just looks so different now. And what does that look like for our families?
Yeah.
What does it look like?
Yeah, and so there's kind of multiple parallels with this one, which I think get at the pandemic experience, like you said, the experience of working with all families as a service coordinator, and then the experience of supporting families who are learning English, and which you may support in some different ways or have different partners like that interpreter. So let's move to our next slide. And we wanted to hear from you guys who are listening along about your experience supporting families from English as a second language. So Seth is going to show a poll. It's appeared on your screen. I'll pause to give you a chance to read the poll options. You might have to expand your box to be able to read the whole answers because they're a little long, but so maybe I'll read them in case your box looks tiny. So your different options are, I'm bilingual and regularly support families who are English language learners. I'm monolingual and regularly support families. I've only supported a few families who are English language learners, or I have not supported any families. I should have added yet who are English language learners, because you will if you're new to early intervention. So we'll pause and just let folks answer, and then we'll pull the results up and take a look at those. So it looks like the answers are coming in. All right, well, there we go. We got a couple more people participating. I appreciate you guys doing this. All right, it looks like we have about 3/4 of our folks having participated. More than that, it looks like 80%. So Seth, if you don't mind going ahead and publishing the poll, that would be awesome. So you can see here, we've got about 60% of our folks are not bilingual or speaking one language, and I'm going to make an assumption that that language is English, and readily supporting families who are English language learners. We do have a few folks that are bilingual, which is such a wonderful skill to have, and then a few that say they've only supported a few families who are English language learners. So I love this, Anita, the fact that we have a large group of 60% of folks who do similar work to what you're going to talk about. I hope you guys listening will share your expertise along with what we're going to hear from Anita. Awesome. So you guys can X out of your poll. I'm going to do that, and I'll keep us moving. So we're going to start chatting about, Anita mentioned her passion for this work. So I thought a great place to start is to hear from Anita, why is this work so important? Where does that passion come from? And what do you enjoy about it? And when Anita and I met, this was kind of where we started. And so Anita told me a story about where her passion for this work came from, kind of before she came to early intervention. So Anita, if you'll share that story with the audience, that would be wonderful. And if folks who are listening, if you guys want to type into the chat, what do you enjoy about working with this population of families? So let us know in chat while Anita is telling her story. There you go.
I'm from Baltimore. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. And I was in the military for about 10 years, but I really feel like my passion for working with people came when I got out of the military in El Paso, Texas. I went to school there for social work with an emphasis in substance abuse. And one of the places that I did my internship and eventually started working with had a very rare program. It's called the Southwest Migrant Farm Worker Program. We would actually go to the fields because if you're having a substance abuse problem, or you're struggling and you want to be able to get some support, people that are working in the fields can't say, oh, I need to take half a day off so I can go in and get some support. So we would get our big RV and we would travel to the fields. One of those places that we would go is Del City, Texas. And during Red Ribbon a week where we talk about a lot of drug prevention and things like that. We would go down and talk to the kids in the school. Um, it happened that I was able to do my part of my internship there, where I opened a little office where I did prevention and education. And one of the things that the parents said was that we want to have the same information that you're giving to the kids. So whenever I would have someone in the school, I would have them come after lunch, after the fathers went back to the fields, and they would provide the same class in English or in Spanish, mostly in Spanish. And there was a lady there, and her countenance, she just was really, you could just really see that she was really sad. Um, and I happened to have one of my colleagues there once with me, and we were taking her home, and she had said that her son died. He was a teenager. And she said, he went out, he went to play basketball, and he died. And I don't know why. I think he's a good kid. I thought he was a good kid. I thought I don't think he did drugs, but I could be wrong. Um, and so I went to the medical examiner in El Paso, and I got the report. And I probably wouldn't do this now, but one of my friends helped me to translate it. And I went there and I read it to her. It comes to find out that he had died of heart attack or some kind of heart condition. And while no one wants their child to die of anything, you don't want to outlive the kid, you could just see her countenance um, just changed over the time that I got a chance to be with her, because she had an answer to a question. Number one, because she had an interpreter. I had a little bit of Spanish. I could say, do you need me to pick you up? How did you like the class? But I didn't have enough language to talk about her heart issue. Her heart issue was that my baby is gone, and I don't know why, and I haven't gotten any supports to be able to find that out. And so there were many people there that could have, but for some reason, she still didn't have that information, and it just spoke to me, to be able to give people a voice. And so that's one of the many things. But I just remember that, and she said, "Yeah, it runs in my family," and you could just see her. She just lightened, and it just was a good thing to see.
Yeah, Anita, that reminds me about how in early intervention we talk about addressing families' priorities and what's most useful to them and most relevant to them. And while it sounds like that parent might have been coming to classes and all, there was something underlying for her that was the most relevant piece. And I appreciate how you said, her demeanor changed. She had finally gotten her answer. So imagine how absorbing that would be as a mom to not know the answer, and then to find somebody who helps you find that answer when you can't get it because of a language barrier. Yeah, I think that's really powerful. And I think, it sounds like you were working with interpreters there too. You had a little bit of Spanish, but tapping into the interpreter to help. You said you had a friend too that helped with interpreting, but tapping into an interpreter seems especially important in that story. And I think it's really important in the context of EI too.
It was, and it was El Paso is just one of those places where the majority of people are bilingual.
Okay.
And so um, it was an informal interpretation translation network that we had.
Yeah. So thinking about like the connection between your story and now, what do you really enjoy about working with families, infants and toddlers, the families in early intervention that you do service coordination with, who are English language learners? What do you really like about that? And let us know in chat, guys, what do you all enjoy about working with this group of families?
I just like being able to hear from the parents and
Mhm.
from the siblings, and just being able to work in that natural environment. And I know that, we're still in a pandemic, so it looks a little different. But number one, letting people know that we're here to support them, and there's no questions that they can't ask. They don't have to try to figure out that word in English. They can say it in whatever language that they need to say it in, because most of the time when we're dealing with our emotions, unless we're fluently bilingual, we're going to want to revert to the our language that we're most fluent in. And just being able to, so during that assessment period, um when they're talking to the therapist, and then as we follow up with them and connecting them with supports, just being able to listen to what they have to say through an interpreter.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's so important, and kind of to bring a level of respect to the interaction for the family's communication style, the way they communicate, whatever language is easier for them. To me, it's not just we get an interpreter because we have to, or because it's one of the family's rights. It's because it's so essential. You can't do the work and do it well, like you said, supporting families well, unless we have that stream of communication and can really find out what's important to families and understand their cultural context. Because I think the cultural context is especially important when we think about learning. I can think of a family I worked with who the family was from El Salvador, and I was trying to get the mother to play and join, into playful activities, and through the interpreter found out that that wasn't really how their family within their culture worked. The adults took care of caregiving and the house and making meals and taking care of the children and going to work, things like that. And the children played with each other. So to ask her to play with toys with her son, she wasn't unwilling, but it was uncomfortable a little for her because it wasn't typically the way she interacted with him. And so I love what you said about like communicating and finding out about families. And I think it's so important in multiple different ways. And I think a service coordinator can find out and understand some of those cultural contexts and then help the rest of the team understand that too.
Yeah. I used to,
Yeah.
I had one family, and the little girl, every time her sister would put on her hijab, she would start to cry because she knew her sister was going out. And so
Oh,
just learning stuff like that. Yeah, and it's more of a challenge now, but hopefully we'll get to the point where we are back in the homes, and interacting better like that.
yeah. Now, is most of your service coordination virtual, Anita? Or are you seeing families in
Mhm.
person yet? It's still
It's
virtual.
Most of mine is virtual,
Okay.
and so but we still make sure that they have an interpreter. I do a lot of calling, and just making sure that families, as much as I can. We've had a lot. It's a pandemic,
It's a
we're
pandemic.
it's a pandemic, and we just got a lot of stuff going on, and so as much as I would like to try, I try to connect with them using the interpreters.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to talk more about the interpreters in just a second. I think everybody's doing the best they can under
Yeah.
circumstances that we've never been through before. So
Hmm.
Joanne says in the chat, thanks, Joanne. She says, I've enjoyed building partnership with our Spanish speaking families, even if it's through a live or telephone interpreter. The challenges make the successes feel greater. Yeah, that's a great perspective, Joanne, that the challenges make the successes feel even better. I love that. Well, let me check in with you guys. It's one thing to have experience working with families. It's another thing to feel confident providing support to families who are speaking a different language than you. So we've mentioned Spanish, but we are not just talking about Spanish speaking families. Virginia has a lot of diversity and a lot of different languages, especially in certain parts of our state. I know, the Northern Virginia part has a lot of experience working with families of different diverse backgrounds too. So we're going to use your stamp tool again and drop your stamp on our continuum here. Are you feeling very confident working with families who speak a different language than yours? Kind of in the middle somewhere, or maybe not so confident? And if you're not so confident, a lot of times that confidence, you need skills or need to develop your own skills and your own tools to develop that confidence with experience over time. So let us know where you are. You can also use the chat if that's easier to let us know where that is for you. I'm just pausing to take a look and see where folks are landing. So it looks like, Anita, we have kind of in the middle here, kind of in the middle towards very confident. What do you think, Anita, helps a service coordinator develop confidence in working with families of different backgrounds?
I think just being open to learning.
Mm-hmm.
You can learn from the interpreters, you can learn from the families, and just asking questions. I The essential questions are will just help you as well. What are the concerns that you have about your baby? What's going on? What are some of the supports that you need? When you connect them with that, then you start to learn a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest challenge is time.
Hmm.
right now, always, but just having the time to be able to listen to people. But I think it's the main thing is just being able to ask the questions that you would ask. What do you want your child to be doing? And they'll tell you. They'll let you know.
Yeah, and making sure you're still asking the questions, even if you're working through an interpreter, you're still asking the same questions. And sometimes you work with the interpreter to figure out how to communicate the intent of the same question, but we still want to give the families the
Yeah.
opportunity to provide that same information. Yeah, Melissa says in the chat, asking questions about their family's culture is so important to gain trust and confidence. Yeah, I'm curious, Melissa, or if anybody else in the audience has examples of questions that you ask to learn about family's culture. I don't know, Anita, if you have questions that you ask, or does that just kind of learning about the family's particular culture bubble up? Because we can't, I'm recently learned this great phrase that said stereotypes are always incomplete. So we can't think that because this family is from Mexico, or this family, like you mentioned, this family is from an Arab background or whatever, that we're going to lump them into this pool of thinking about the way they operate, because there's a lot of diversity within cultures too. So we have to take the time, like Melissa says, to ask about families' culture and to be open to learning about their ways of being, rather than thinking we've read an article and we know, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that it's important again that we're focusing on their main primary concern, which is their child. And so, is it relevant to ask the question about the culture? How does it play in with what it is that you're trying to support them with? Like
Mm-hmm.
Ramadan. I have to laugh because sometimes therapists will try during that Ramadan season to have like sessions early in the morning. That might not be a good idea because just the nature of Ramadan and the celebrations, that last in the evening.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe later, just looking at that. But that for me, it usually comes up within the context of how can we support you and
Yeah.
what are some concerns that you have. Not specifically saying, well, tell me about this or tell me about this. Tell me how we can support you. What do you do during the day? Those
Yeah.
are the things, anything that we would ask our parents, parents that are English speakers.
Yeah, I can think about it coming up too with like assessments, sometimes assessing uh, feeding skills, or assessing some different types of, expectations around behavior and stuff that can be affected by families' cultures. And so sometimes in the context of those conversations, I think it's so important to be open to listening and learning about that, and having a comfort with asking, because we don't want to write outcomes that are not culturally responsive just because a child missed something on an assessment, right? So it's definitely part of the big picture. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about interpreters. You mentioned that before, and our interpreters come all kinds of different, or the interpretation can happen all kinds of different ways. We can have somebody join you on your face-to-face visit, join you on your virtual visit. I think somebody mentioned the telephone, so language line. Tell us a little bit more, Anita, how you collaborate with language interpreters to kind of make sure through service coordination families can communicate and participate in the process.
I did want to also, before I say that, I think Melissa said that, making sure that you are talking to the family, but not talking to the interpreter. I mean,
Yeah.
that is key. So I think that the pandemic has lent itself more to us people being more open to language line or
Mhm.
interpreters being able to participate via telephone.
Mhm.
We have some interpreters that we contract with, and we have a translator that translates our documents for us.
Mhm.
One of our interpreters goes with the families as much as possible, or the therapist as much as possible. The other one is strictly telehealth, but we use language line, and we just make sure. The main thing that I always explain to parents is that we want them as much as possible. We want you to be comfortable with the interpreter because
Mhm.
that's a part of the team. But my goal is to get the supports in the home, so
Mhm.
the therapist in the home, and so I have to make sure that the times work for the therapist, and then getting that interpreter there. So if we can't get an in-person interpreter, what does that look like? How do we support the therapist with going in and making sure that they have the supports that they need because they always need an interpreter. I never encourage people to go without an interpreter unless they're fluently bilingual, because that will be that one time where they're not just talking about a muscle or feeding, they're talking about something, um, you know, something different, and you might not have the words. Like, I'm here at this session, but my daughter, she was in an accident and she's in the hospital. My other daughter, and so I'm leaving here and I'm feeling kind of anxious, or my husband is beating me. Things that you wouldn't expect. We don't want a therapist to be in that position where they don't have the supports that they know to know what the parent is saying.
Yeah.
So I always encourage interpreters.
Yeah, and it's definitely best practice to stay away from using interpreters, using other children in the home to interpret. And that's so easy to slip towards if there's an older child that could interpret. But it's definitely, we don't want to lean that way, because sometimes kids, they don't know the words, and it's not really an appropriate relationship for them to be interpreting what you're saying or what that therapist or that educator is saying. But I'm going to pause this for a second, Anita. It looks like we've got a lot of hearts and stars here. So Seth, if you don't mind clearing the screen for me, and make sure that anybody who is dropping hearts and stars clicks out of their annotation menu, because it's so easy to not do that and then accidentally drop them on there. So thank you guys. So you brought up a good point, Anita, about the importance, not only you using a language interpreter for your service coordination, but also making sure that person is available for service providers. So I'm going to transition us to our next question, which is, how do you work with service providers, your other team members, to prepare them for supporting family members who are English language learners? So you mentioned that you make sure that that service provider has access to the interpreter. You mentioned that you have documents translated into the family's language, so the family has that IFSP, so they know, they can see the goals, they can track them across time, they know what services and service providers are going to be there. What other strategies do you have for collaborating with, coordinating that team when you have a language difference with the family?
Well, we also try to make sure that we're getting other supports in to support the family.
Okay.
It's not just the early intervention. So connecting them to other supports like case management, nurse case management, or connecting them to Family Lifeline, or Center for Cultural, what is it? Wait a minute, Center for Cultural, I can't think of the word right now.
That's okay.
The cultural brokers at the um, through the Center for Family Involvement, and it's actually through VCU. So the navigators to help the parents, connecting them to resources, now telehealth, or the navigators that are able to do the groups. But as far as with the therapist, one of the things that I let them know is that the main thing is just thank you, Center for Family Involvement. I should have known that.
Thanks, Lisa.
Just letting the therapist know that the main thing is to get the services into the home. And so we are willing to make sure that we can accommodate their schedule, their parents. So they shouldn't have to like work their schedule to accommodate, just one interpreter. We can get them the supports that they need. The main thing is to get the services in the home. And then those are the main things. Just making sure that they know that that they can get the services in the home, and that we don't have to be everything to everyone. That we can connect them to other services as they need. But then the basics, making sure that you're looking at the family, making sure you're talking to the family, making sure that the family knows who are the providers. Like I always want to make sure that my families know I'm the service coordinator. If I have to make a phone call and the interpreter has to leave a message, I ask them to call me back. And if they call me back, then I will get an interpreter and I will call them, because I want them to know it's not fair to the interpreters for me to expect them to know what I want to say, because they're interpreting. So I just make sure that the families know, hey, if you've got a problem, you can call me. I have enough skills to know, call me back, and I will call you back with an interpreter and we can talk about what it is you need. And the same thing for the therapist.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're also kind of modeling how to communicate with families, which will help your therapist be able to do that too. It's like setting up a good communication system. And I love what you said, Anita, that we don't have to be all things to all families. So finding out what the resources are in your community. And I think Corey and Lisa can help me with this too. But Anita, you might know the Center for Family Involvement, if that's a resource that folks haven't heard of around the state, they have cultural brokers. They can serve families across the state. It's not just a Richmond specific kind of a resource. So if you're not familiar with that, click the link that Lisa dropped in chat, and Lisa and Corey put the name there. That's a fantastic resource to take advantage of, because they have all kinds of resources that would help, including family members talking to other family members. So it's a really nice setup, and then to help bridge some of those cultural chasms that can develop too. So I'm so glad you brought that up, Anita.
Yeah.
Anita, do your service providers use the language line much when they're talking with families, or do you guys in Richmond have enough interpreters that you're usually able to link families with, I guess, live interpreters to join visits?
Usually we can link families, but if it's a time that is, like 5 o'clock or 5:15 and our interpreters aren't, we use language line, or
Okay.
we use other services that support the family. Sometimes we can request interpreters that go out in the home, but we primarily use the ones that we have.
Yeah.
What I want to get better at is getting interpreters through Medicaid so that they can, so it'll just be a little bit smoother, but I have not gotten that skill yet.
Okay.
I haven't gotten the time to do that.
Yeah, I think one of the important things when interpreters are working with you as a service coordinator, working with your other team members, is making sure the interpreter has some knowledge about the service. So they have a heads up about what terminology might come up. Or, sometimes they can almost be a cultural mediator for the service providers too. That was actually where I found out that in this family's, the family I mentioned from Ecuador, and the area they were from, their background, that play with parents and children didn't look the same as what I expected. The interpreter helped me understand that. And then on the next visit, we had a conversation with the mother to find out if that was true for her family. So I didn't want to just say, oh, well, because she's from Ecuador, this applies. And when we had that discussion with her, she said, yes, I wish you could do the visits when my older son is home, because he could be a part of this and a part of the play. So we switched the time of day to do that after school hours, so that he was about 8 or 9, and he had a blast. We had a lot of fun with him, but it sort of loosened up the situation because it matched the way that family worked better. Let's see, there's in here in chat, Karen writes, we're often seeing families after hours as they're working, and we know it's best practice to use interpreters, but they're not always available. So sometimes they use family and friends within that family. And I think that to me seems like that could be up to the family if they have access to a neighbor or somebody to translate. I know sometimes that does happen. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that one, Anita. Or
I have had families that will request that the interpreter would be a family member. And that whether they're an adult or a teenager, especially with the teenagers, the teenagers for the most part are teenagers, and so you're talking and the teenagers like um, but it just it's more complicated, but you have to be mindful of what families are comfortable with,
Yeah.
whether they prefer just only women to
Yeah.
be accompanying them. One of the things, when I use language line, what I encourage therapists to do, and this is what I do, if I have to use language line to go into a home, I call them beforehand. And I say, okay, I'm going into this home. We're going to be a part of this assessment. There's going to be 4 people talking. We will do our best to make sure that, we're putting it in a central place so you can hear everything. This is going to last 2 hours. Are you able to do that? So I set that up. I go in with the interpreter already on the phone. That way, I'm going in with my mouth. I'm going in, and the therapists are going in with their mouth. And what I have learned is, when I'm talking to them in my car, getting ready to go in, if I can't hear them there, I'm not going to hear them in the assessment. And so I will now know that I could just say, I'm going to get a different interpreter, because I need to have a better communication, a better line and we can, we can do that. I know to do that now, because if I can't hear you, no one else is going to hear you. So.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point of preparing yourself and preparing the interpreter for the situation. I think that's a really important strategy to use. Let's see, Joanne says she has gotten interpreters through Medicaid, and it's not easy, especially when the child doesn't yet have a care coordinator. So it's easier once the care coordinator is familiar with your program. So that's good advice. Thanks, Joanne. All right,
Do
let's
you
see.
have to do it? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Do you have to request it all the time, or does the care coordinator take care of that once you establish it?
Yeah, let us know, Joanne, if you have an answer to that question in the chat. That would be helpful. And she says Medicaid is not always able to find interpreters to come out to our rural counties. She gives the care coordinator the scheduled visits. And I guess the care coordinator must coordinate that interpreter. So that's a great partnership when it works well, I bet.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Joanne. If others have experience with that, let us know how it works for you.
I want to get better at that.
Yeah. So let's transition a little bit. We'll kind of get a little more specific, even when we think about service coordination. And, I know, Anita, you said one of your passions is also working with families who have children with complex disabilities. So tell us how this all comes together. And if you have any advice for folks who are working with families. I'm losing my voice. Who have children with more complex disabilities. Any strategies or advice you have?
I think it's just like when I was sharing with my granddaughter, just it's a process. It's a process. It's not something that is going to, um, it's just a process. You have to establish trust that the services that you're getting, things they're all talking about and recommending are things that, number one, they are accepting of. I mean, because think about it, whether English language learners or proficient, we're talking about their baby, and it's like, yeah, I don't see that yet. So just being able to walk alongside parents and meeting them wherever they are, and then, at some point they may say, hey, I have a question about autism, or I may have to have a surgery. But some kids come in complex with shunts and breathing tubes, just connecting them with the resources that they need. I think parents are really grateful for them, because all of a sudden you've got a baby, you can prepare for some things that, diapers and beds and all of that stuff. But now I have a baby, and the baby has a trach, and the baby has a G tube, and what does that look like? And am I being heard? Do I feel like I'm being heard by the doctors, by the specialists? Can I request a different one? Just giving, letting them know what are the options available to them, like we would do any other family, but just giving them a voice, because they have an interpreter, and the interpreter can tell you what they're thinking.
Yeah, that kind of goes back to your story, I think, before, Anita, about making sure families have that way to communicate. What comes to mind for me is the medical reports that come. Like, I think there could be a great benefit of the service coordinator making sure those are translated, whether it's orally or on paper, so that the family knows what's in that report. Then they can advocate for themselves and their children better if they really have a full picture and they're able to communicate their questions, because there's a lot of questions for a child with the trach or with more significant different needs. So, and I love what you said about making sure families know they have a choice, because, there are some families from some cultural backgrounds, they're different ideas than I might have of cultural hierarchies. So I know I remember working with a family that really saw me as the educator, as like an expert, kind of like, and so was the mother was not as comfortable questioning me when I would ask for, what questions do you have? She didn't really have any. And I learned that she didn't think she was supposed to question me. Like, that wasn't typically how her culture worked. And so I think the same could be possible for the medical professionals too, where a family might not feel that that's their role to question. So learning about how that works in that family's culture, and then sharing the information with them so that they are able to get the information they need, however that works for them. I think there could be some of the cultural factors could affect the child's care, and we'd want to make sure we're working within and even around those with the family, so they're getting the care they need. Yeah, that could be, I think, where some of the learning process comes in, even like you were talking about, Nita, with learning about the interpreters through Medicaid, learning what resources are out there for the service coordinator, and then helping the family learn how the system works in this country and how they can get the support that they need. So I'm glad you brought that up about it's not is not a lot different than how you work with other families, but you want to make sure the families have a voice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now the next question, I'm looking at our time, Anita. And we've talked a little bit about virtual services. And I didn't know if there was anything else you would like to add when you think about providing service coordination virtually with the collaboration of an interpreter. You've mentioned several great strategies. I wanted to give you a chance if there's anything to add here before we go on to talking about transition.
I think the main thing is being prepared, having the interpreter there first. If you have to use, sometimes we've had families that English might be their third or fourth language. And
Mm,
so maybe trying to find an interpreter that speaks a particular dialect of a language. And if we can't find that, then what's the next one? French. Being able to connect with them ahead of time more so than if you were just calling language line, because um, it's just more complex. Just being
yeah,
able to give more information. Yeah, the pregame is so it's helpful, it's supportive. When I talk to families, I really just I feel like I just need to let them know, what we do and what our purpose is to support them, but what that looks like. Um, but then also getting those resources. Do they have SSI? Um,
yeah,
are they having problems getting um, are they having problems getting the resources that they need from different supports, like if they get delivery of medical equipment,
mhm,
how to access, Spanish, requesting Spanish interpreters in different services and things along that lines.
yeah,
Um, and I think that the virtual, with parents in virtual, because kids like to use the phone so much. If they see
mhm,
their parent with a phone, they're like, "Oh, it's time for whatever." I encourage parents to get like the earbuds, um, um, and then put the phone up higher so that they are able to concentrate and focus on what they're doing. That's if the interpreter and the therapist um, are both virtual, but
mhm.
um, just being able to get a view, just understanding that they don't have to have the child just sitting in their lap. We want to be able to support them and see the whole, as much as they're comfortable, see what's going on and see how they're moving around their environment. But if the interpreter is the only person that's on the virtual, just making sure it's coordinated ahead of time. Well, who's gonna call up the interpreter? Just knowing who's gonna do what.
Yeah, that's like Melissa said, the pregame again, like being prepared before you walk in so it'll go smoothly in front of the family for sure.
Hmm.
All right. Well, we'll wrap up with a little bit of discussion about transition. So I didn't, I think helping a family transition to wherever they're transitioning to, whether it's Part B, early childhood special education, or another type of a program in the community. What does that look like when you're helping families who are speaking, learn English language learners go through that transition process? Because we all know there's lots of steps, there's timelines, there's figuring out what's the right place for that the family wants the child to go. So does your transition process, do you adapt that process at all when you're working with family, a family who's an English language learner?
Well, I just make sure that when we're doing the transition, that like the school system knows that they need to have interpreters. And I explain it like I explain it to English. They people that speak English as the first language, is that we do this every day. This is common, and we know those supports are out there. But recognizing that this is your baby, this is an event that is not common for you. Just like, okay, this is my 3-year-old. I recognize that he is still your baby, and so there's nothing that you have to do until he is 5. At 5, he has to go to school, or she has to go to school.
Mhm.
So, what kind of supports do you think that they would need? before then to get them to where, you're comfortable with them being in school. And so it's just a conversation like that. Um, Making sure again that they know that their rights, they can have everything translated into their language, and
Mhm.
just trying to walk alongside them with, I can't say I do as many I try to be at the child study meeting and the eligibility determination, but I also send out information um, um, on things before, things after before the IEP, after the IEP, just walking them through that process. So I send it out in it as much as possible in the language that they, um, that's their primary language.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I like the questions you asked there, Anita. They were kind of open-ended rather than saying transition is happening. These are the options. You've asked an open-ended questions. What kind of support do you think your child is going to need and you're going to need to get your child there, wherever the there is? And if the there is, I don't really want to do, I don't want to send them to preschool because they're only 3. I will wait till later. There's still room in that conversation for the family to express what's important to them and where they want to go. As you were talking earlier, I was thinking it seems like it would be important to find out who the decision makers are in the family too, because sometimes you're maybe visiting with the parent, the mother, but maybe that father really needs to be a part of this transition discussion because he's an important decision maker, or the grandmother or the neighbor next door. Like finding out who the decision makers in their cultural context are can be really important people to tap into, especially when these big decisions come up like transition.
Yeah. And then also considering what's going on. I mean, sometimes we don't have families. I had a family once that I know that my child needs supports, but it was just a really tumultuous time for families that may have had family members that were undocumented. And she's like, I'm just afraid to go out the house,
Yeah.
and just being able to understand that and respect that, and see how you can work with the families.
And I
Like, I
think,
know,
yeah, I was going to say, and even and being mindful of the language you're using so that you are not, there's no judgment about a family being undocumented, that you're accepting that family and you're there to help them. And I think that's important. And, because judgment can creep in all kinds of ways when working with all kinds of different people. So being mindful to be respectful of the family and to learn about what it's like for them, because I think you got a message from that family that how hard things were for them, that they didn't want to leave the house. Yeah.
yeah. And then connecting them with something that they felt comfortable with, like the Center for Family Involvement. Um,
They will be
um,
happy. They've gotten some great plugs
I
today.
love
So it's
them.
good.
I do. I love them. And Family Lifeline, they do a great job as well with helping with navigating cultural concerns and depression because they're not home, and you never know what got them here.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah. Or what family they left
the
behind.
trauma.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And the trauma of that transition for sure. Well, that is it for us here for our conversation today. There's so much more we could talk about. I think we could keep going. So, but I did want to point you to our website, the Virginia Early Intervention Professional Development Center. We have a topic page that's called Cultural Competence, and we have lots of resources there, handouts. There's archived webinars there about different cultural factors, about building your own cultural competence, approaching the work from a culturally humble and culture responsive perspective, tools and videos. So we hope that you will check that out. If Seth, if you don't mind dropping that link into the chat for me, or Corey or Lisa, that would be great, a link to this page. And there's also lots of other resources on our website that could help service coordinators. We also have a topic page specific for service coordination. So it's another place to go to gather some good resources. Um, I want to wrap us up by thanking you, Anita. Thanks for taking the time with us today, for being such a steady voice to talk about the importance of service coordination. And I feel like a theme throughout your information you shared today was to sort of supporting families' communication, giving them a voice and making sure they have what they need and they're a part of deciding what they want as active participants in the early intervention process, because early intervention is like its own world. So to try to figure this world out, the service coordinator is a key player there.
It is. They are. Thank you. And this was, thank you. I enjoyed it. And thank you, everyone. I've gotten some great information. Again, we're all learning this. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, good. Well, I wanted to let you guys know before you log off, stay tuned for future service coordination chats later this year. Just keep an eye on your email. We'll send out some information when we have topics and speakers lined up. We love these conversations, and we really tried this year and the last one last year to share the expertise of service coordinators. So you're getting to hear from the folks that are doing the work. We also ask you to check your inbox because you should already have an email in there with the feedback survey. Complete the evaluation survey, give us your feedback. We really do take that into account as we're planning. And then once you complete the survey, the last page will link you to your certificate of completion. So you can use that towards your professional development, your early intervention case management service, your early intervention case management certification. I was going to say service coordination. The words are too similar. And that's it for us today, guys. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I hope you'll join us next time. And again, thanks so much, Anita. Appreciate it. It's been great working with you.
Thank y'all. Have a wonderful day.
Bye, everybody.